So we're called the problem of evil. So the problem of evil says, how can it be that we can have a God who is a creature who has the following three properties: omniscience, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence? Given that this creature has these three properties, how could evil possibly exist in our world? And so one response to the problem of evil is the free will response. So free will response says that the reason why evil exists in our world, despite God having these three properties, is because God gave us free will. So evil exists in the world. It's an unfortunate thing, but it is a product of God giving us free will. And in light of God giving us free will, some bad things, some evil things are bound to happen. Okay, so now consider the following line of thought. So if God's omniscient, that means he knows everything. And if God knows everything, then that means he knows everything that's going to happen in the future. Right? So he knows everything that's going to happen to you in the future because God knows everything. He can predict in advance everything to the exact detail what's going to happen to you in the future. Okay, but if that's true, you might wonder whether or not it's really true that we have free will at this point. Because after all, God can predict everything in advance, right? He can predict everything you're going to do in advance. So how could it be that we actually have free will under those circumstances? So several people have raised this question, particularly Lee Castro puts the question as follows. If God knows what I'm going to choose, or if God knows what decision I'm going to make before I even make the decision, and he knows that for every decision, is it really true that I have free will? Isn't that the definition? Isn't that the opposite of the definition of free will, right? Because you can make, for every decision that you make, God knows in advance what that decision will be, right? And that's caused some people to ask this question. Now, there are different people take different sides of this issue. So some people, like Sean 62485, for instance, believe that God's omniscience does contradict us having free will. Other people, like Trotsky, for instance, believes that God's omniscience doesn't contradict our having free will. Right? So there's been a lot of discussion about this issue. And I think it's an interesting issue, and I think it's a good question, right? And I suggest you keep it in mind because we'll be discussing it in future lectures. Specifically, we'll be discussing it in the context of the work of the philosopher Harry Frankfurt. Right? So he believes that our having free will is compatible with, for instance, God knowing everything that we're going to do in advance. In fact, our having free will is compatible with any agent knowing what we're going to do to the exact detail in the future, right? So this is called the compatibilist approach. Right? So we'll discuss in the future. Keep this question in mind and stay tuned.